Imagine a world where power was absolute, where empires rose from nothing to dominate continents, where a single emperor could decide the fate of millions with just a word. Imagine a city that conquered the known world, a civilization so advanced, so brutal, and yet so fascinating, that its influence still echoes today. This is the story of Rome, not the Rome you learn it about in textbooks, but the untold history, the secrets that history books never dare to fully reveal. If you think you know the Roman Empire, think again. What you are about to discover will change the way you look at history forever. Stick with me until the end, because by the last second, you will not only understand Rome's true story but also why its shadows still haunt modern civilization. The Roman Empire did not rise overnight. Its foundations were laid long before Julius Caesar ever crossed the Rubicon. Rome began as a small, struggling city-state, surrounded by rival tribes and constantly under threat. Its people were not born rulers. They were survivors, fighters, and cunning strategists. The early Romans were masters of adaptation. They learned from their enemies, absorbed their skills, and turned weaknesses into strengths. From humble huts along the Tiber River, they would go on to conquer lands stretching from the sands of Egypt to the forests of Germania. But their rise was not a straight path. It was paved with intrigue, betrayal, bloodshed, and the relentless ambition of men who refused to fire. The Republic, as Rome was known for centuries, was a delicate balance of power. The Senate, wealthy patricians, and common citizens shared authority, or at least they were supposed to. But behind the facade of democracy lurked corruption, manipulation, and power struggles that make modern politics look tame. Ambitious generals, like Marius and Sulla, used armies not just to defend Rome, but to influence politics. When Sulla marched on Rome with his legions, he set a precedent that would echo for decades. The path to power often ran through the blood of your own people. Civil wars became the norm, and the streets of Rome often ran red before the empire even fully emerged. Julius Caesar was the man who epitomized this struggle. Loved by the people for his charisma and daring, feared by the elite for his ambition, Caesar's life was a tale of brilliance shadowed by danger. He crossed the Rubicon not just as a general returning from conquest, but as a man challenging the very foundation of Roman law. On the Ides of March, when the dagger struck, it wasn't just Caesar who fell. It was the moment Rome realized that even the strongest man could not escape the consequences of absolute ambition. But Caesar's death was not the end. It was the ignition of a new era, the rise of Augustus, the first emperor, who transformed Rome from a republic riddled with civil wars into an empire that would last centuries. Augustus was not just a ruler. He was a master of perception. He cleverly presented himself as a humble servant of the state while secretly holding absolute control. His reign brought peace, prosperity, and monumental architecture, but it also marked the beginning of Rome's darker side. Absolute power, after all, can seduce even the wisest, and in Rome, the line between justice and tyranny was often blurred. The Roman Empire's military was legendary, yet the stories of discipline, strategy, and loyalty barely scratched the surface. The legions were not just soldiers. They were the backbone of a system that demanded absolute obedience. Training was brutal, punishment harsh, and failure unforgivable. Yet, this system created warriors capable of marching thousands of miles, building roads, forts, and bridges, and then striking with precision that bewildered their enemies. But even the mighty legions could not stop the internal decay. Ambition, corruption, and betrayal spread through the ranks as quickly as their conquests spread across continents. Rome was a city of grandeur and contradictions. Its citizens enjoyed baths, gladiator games, and opulent villas, yet the streets often hid poverty, disease, and crime. Political assassinations, bribery, and manipulation were part of daily life. Caligula, infamous for his madness, and Nero, remembered for tyranny and debauchery, ruled with unchecked power, leaving chaos in their wake. They were not the norm, but they revealed the terrifying reality. In Rome, absolute power could corrupt absolutely. Economically, Rome was a marvel, yet fragile. The empire thrived on trade, conquest, and exploitation of conquered lands. Wealth flowed into the city like rivers, funding magnificent architecture, entertainment, and military expansion. But this wealth was unevenly distributed. The elite lived in palaces, while the majority struggled. The reliance on conquest meant Rome's prosperity was never guaranteed. When borders expanded too far, when legions could not protect every province, cracks began to show. The empire's strength was as much about fear as it was about loyalty. Religion and culture were intertwined with politics in ways that shaped the very identity of Rome. The pantheon of gods reflected the ambitions, fears, and morals of a civilization constantly testing its limits. Emperors often claimed divine favor, blending politics and spirituality to strengthen their grip on power. Festivals, rituals, and public spectacles reinforced loyalty and distracted the masses from political corruption. But beneath the ceremonies lay unrest, and the suppressed voices of conquered peoples would one day fuel revolts that even Rome could not ignore. Rome's infrastructure, from roads to aqueducts, was revolutionary. The roads allowed legions to move quickly and traders to expand commerce. Aqueducts brought water into cities, supporting growth and sanitation. Yet, these marvels also masked the exploitation and slavery that fueled the empire. Slaves built temples, monuments, and palaces, while their own lives were expendable. Behind Rome's splendor was a reality of brutality and oppression that the glittering mosaics never revealed. The empire's borders were constantly tested. From the deserts of Africa to the forests of Germania, Rome faced enemies who refused submission. Some were destroyed, others absorbed into the empire. But even with conquest, assimilation, and diplomacy, pressure from external forces like the Huns, Goths, and Vandals intensified. Rome's military might could conquer cities, but it could not conquer time. Internal decay, combined with relentless external pressure. Architecture, law, language, and culture influenced civilizations long after the fall of the Western Empire. Roads laid centuries ago still guide modern highways, while Roman law principles underpin many legal systems today. But the untold story remains in the shadows: the human cost, the bloodshed, the betrayals, and the lives lost to ambition and greed. This is what makes Rome both fascinating and cautionary, a civilization that inspires awe while reminding us of the dangers of absolute power. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire did not happen overnight. It was gradual. A slow unraveling of military overreach, economic instability, and political corruption, barbarian invasions, internal revolts, and the erosion of civic duty all played a part. Even as Rome fell, its eastern counterpart, the Byzantine Empire, carried fragments of Roman culture, law, and governance for centuries, preserving what the West could no longer sustain. Rome's history is not just about emperors, battles, or architecture. It is about the very human stories that shaped it. Soldiers who marched into unknown lands, citizens who lived in fear and luxury, slaves whose labor built monuments, and rulers whose ambition defined an era. It is in these stories, often hidden, that the true empire emerges, not merely in the textbooks, but in the blood, sweat, and dreams of those who lived it. And yet, even with all its power and influence, Rome was fragile. One miscalculation, one betrayal, one economic collapse could tip the balance. The same ambition that built roads, bridges, and cities also fueled jealousy, assassination, and civil war. Rome's brilliance was inseparable from its darkness, and the duality is what continues to fascinate historians and storytellers alike. So when we look at the Roman Empire today, we see more than ruins and statues. We see ambition in its rawest form, a civilization that reached unprecedented heights, a society that entertained, educated, and terrified simultaneously. The legacy of Rome is a mirror reflecting the human capacity for greatness and folly alike. Its lessons are timeless. Power must be balanced with wisdom, expansion tempered with strategy, and leadership guided by vision rather than greed. In conclusion, the untold history of the Roman Empire is a story of contrasts, light and darkness, glory and tragedy, civilization and chaos. It is the story of how humans built a world that continues to inspire our way, shaped our laws, architecture, and culture, a shadow that still lingers in every corner of the modern world. And now, you've glimpsed the untold truths, the untold history of the Roman Empire.